Sell this dump immediately, my wife demanded about my mother's apartment. I refused again and again until she left for good. A week later, I found something in the storage room that changed my life forever. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The apartment sat above a bait shop near Lake Chisago, Minnesota, wedged between the cold water and a stretch of pine forest that went on forever. Old brick, narrow halls, the kind of place that held onto smells like memories. Pine cleaner, damp wood, the faint metallic tang of fish scales tracked in from below. Arthur Graves had lived there for the first 18 years of his life, learning the rhythm of creaking floorboards and which window latch stuck in winter. His mother had owned it for 40 years, paid it off slowly, 1 month at a time, working double shifts at the cannery until her hands cracked and bled. She died 6 months ago. Heart failure. Sudden. Arthur inherited the apartment, the debt-free title, and a storage room full of things he didn't know how to sort through yet. His wife hated every inch of it. Brenna Klein stood in the doorway now, one hand on her hip, the other gripping her phone like a weapon. She wore a gray blazer over black jeans, her dark hair pulled back tight enough to stretch her forehead smooth. Everything about her posture said she'd already made up her mind. Sell it, she said. Not a suggestion, a command. Now, Arthur. It's dead weight. Nothing good lives in places like this. Arthur stood by the kitchen counter, both hands flat against the chipped laminate. He didn't look at her directly. He'd learned that looking at Brenna when she was angry only made things worse. She took eye contact as a challenge. It's not for sale, he said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Brenna laughed. It wasn't warm. It was the sound of someone who'd just heard something absurd, something beneath her. She stepped into the apartment, her shoes tapping against the hardwood, sharp, impatient sounds that echoed in the empty space. You're joking, she said. Tell me you're joking. Arthur turned to face her then, slowly, deliberately. He was taller than her by half a foot, broad-shouldered from years of construction work, but he never used his size to intimidate. His mother had taught him better than that. He kept his voice level, calm, the way he always did when things started to crack. I'm not joking, he said. This place meant something to her. It means something to me. Brenna's expression shifted. The irritation sharpened into something colder, more calculated. She set her phone down on the counter and crossed her arms over her chest. You choose a moldy apartment over your marriage? She asked. Is that what you're telling me right now? I'm choosing my mother, Arthur said. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It pressed down on the room like a weight, filling the space between them with everything they hadn't said in the 3 years they'd been married. Brenna's jaw tightened. Her eyes went flat, the way they did when she was done arguing and ready to act. You know what your problem is, Arthur? She said, her voice dropping lower. You're sentimental. You hang on to things that don't matter anymore. People move on. They grow. You just stay. Arthur didn't respond. He'd heard variations of this speech before. Brenna believed in forward momentum, in cutting loose anything that slowed her down. She'd grown up in a family that measured worth in bank accounts and property values. Her father owned a chain of hardware stores across 3 states. Her mother sat on the board of a hospital foundation. Brenna had learned early that love was conditional, performance-based, and easily revoked. She picked up her phone again and opened the calculator app, tapping numbers with her thumb. We could get $200,000 for this place, maybe more if we stage it right. That's a down payment on something better. Something clean. It's not about the money, Arthur said. Brenna stopped typing. She looked up at him, and for a moment, something raw flickered across her face. Not sadness, not regret, just frustration, pure and simple, the kind that came from realizing someone wasn't going to do what you needed them to do. Everything's about money, Arthur, she said. You just don't want to admit it. She walked past him into the bedroom they'd shared for the past week while they cleaned out his mother's things. Arthur heard her opening drawers, the sound of clothes being pulled from hangers. He stayed in the kitchen, staring at the counter where his mother used to roll out dough for bread, where she used to sit with her coffee in the mornings, where she'd told him once that home wasn't a place you bought. It was a place you built. 20 minutes later, Brenna emerged with a single suitcase. Not the large one she used for vacations. The small one. The overnight bag. The one that said this isn't permanent, but I'm making a point. She stopped in the doorway, the light from the hallway casting her shadow long across the floor. When you're ready to be reasonable, she said, call me. Until then, don't. Arthur stood there, hands still on the counter, and watched her leave. No tears. No raised voices. Just the sound of her shoes on the stairs, the slam of the building's front door, and then silence. He waited until he heard her car start, until the engine noise faded down the street toward the highway. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and let himself breathe. The apartment settled around him. The refrigerator hummed. A pipe knocked somewhere in the walls. Outside, the lake lapped against the shore, steady and indifferent. His phone buzzed. A text from Brenna. Don't call me until you're ready to be reasonable. Arthur set the phone face down on the table and didn't respond. The storage room sat in the basement behind a metal door with a warped handle that had to be lifted and jiggled at the same time to open. Arthur hadn't been down there in years, not since high school, when he'd help his mother move boxes of old tax records and winter gear into the cramped space. A week after Brenna left, he needed his birth certificate, something about updating his insurance, paperwork his mother had always handled before she died. He'd been putting it off, but now it felt urgent, necessary, something concrete to do while his marriage dissolved in slow motion. The basement stairs creaked under his weight. The air down here was cooler, damp, smelling of concrete and mildew. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light that barely reached the corners. The storage room door stood slightly ajar, which was wrong. Arthur always closed doors completely. It was a habit, an instinct, something his mother had drilled into him when he was young. Closed doors keep things contained, she used to say. Open doors let in drafts and mice and trouble. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The room was exactly as cluttered as he remembered. Fishing rods leaned against one wall. Cardboard boxes stacked 3 high, labeled in his mother's careful handwriting, winter clothes. Tax 2018 to 2020. Arthur's school papers. An old space heater. A broken lamp. A metal toolbox he'd used to fix his first bicycle. And in the corner, near the back wall, something new. A plastic tarp. Blue. Industrial grade. Folded badly, one corner tucked under itself, the rest spread out in a rough rectangle. Dark stains spread across the center. Arthur's hands didn't shake. They never did. He'd learned control young, learned to keep his body steady even when his mind raced. He moved toward the tarp slowly, each step deliberate, and crouched down beside it. The smell hit him first. Metallic. Organic. Wrong. He pulled back one corner of the tarp. A foot. Pale. Male. Wearing an expensive sneaker. White with a red stripe. The kind that cost $200. Arthur recognized the shoe. He pulled the tarp back further. Evan Klein lay on his back, arms at his sides, eyes open and clouded. 32 years old. Brenna's younger brother. The one who smiled too much, laughed too loud, always asked about money in that casual way that made it clear he needed some. His throat had been cut. Clean. Surgical. The kind of wound that came from someone who knew what they were doing. Arthur stood up slowly. His mind worked through the facts with the same methodical precision he used when framing a house or fixing a broken engine. No panic. No shock. Just observation and analysis. Evan had been here less than a week, judging by the smell. The blood had pooled and dried beneath him, soaking into the concrete. The storage room door had been unlocked, which meant someone had a key. Someone who knew the apartment. Someone who knew Arthur wouldn't come down here right away. Arthur stepped back from the body and looked around the room more carefully. The fishing rods were untouched. The boxes hadn't been moved. Nothing else seemed disturbed. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, and someone wanted him to find it. He left the storage room, closed the door carefully, and climbed the stairs back to the apartment. His phone sat on the kitchen counter where he'd left it. He picked it up, opened his contacts, and scrolled to the local police station's number. Then he stopped. Something wasn't right. Something in the timing, the placement, the way the tarp had been folded, just badly enough to draw attention. He set the phone down without calling. Not yet. The police came to him 2 days later. Arthur was upstairs in the apartment, working through a box of his mother's financial records, when he heard the knock. 3 sharp raps. Official. Impatient. He opened the door to find 2 detectives standing in the hallway. A man and a woman, both in plain clothes, both wearing expressions that said they'd already made up their minds about something. "Arthur Graves?" the woman asked. She was in her 40s, gray streaking through her dark hair, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "That's me," Arthur said. "I'm Detective Lisa Morrison. This is Detective Tom Reichert. We need to ask you some questions about Evan Klein." Arthur stepped back from the door. "Come in." They entered the apartment with the careful movements of people trained to observe everything. Morrison glanced at the kitchen, at the boxes stacked along one wall, at the closed bedroom door. Reichert's eyes went to Arthur's hands, checking for cuts or bruises. "When's the last time you saw Evan Klein?" Morrison asked. 3 weeks ago, Arthur said. "Family dinner at Brenna's parents' house." "What?" Morrison and Reichert exchanged a look. The kind of look that meant they knew something he was supposed to ask about. "Mr. Klein has been reported missing," Morrison said. "His sister filed the report yesterday. She said he was last seen here at this apartment, arguing with you about selling the property." Arthur felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, recognition. The pieces clicking into place with the precision of a well-laid trap. "That's not true," he said. "Your wife says differently," Reichert cut in. His voice was rougher than Morrison's, more aggressive. "She says you and Evan had a disagreement. Things got heated. She says she's scared of you." "My wife left me a week ago," Arthur said evenly. "She wanted me to sell this apartment. I refused. She hasn't been here since." "She was here 3 weeks ago," Morrison said. "According to her statement, she witnessed the argument between you and her brother. She says you threatened him." "I never threatened anyone," Arthur said. "She says you have a temper," Reichert continued. "That you keep things bottled up until you snap. That she's seen it before." Arthur looked between them, seeing the way they stood, the way their hands stayed loose and ready. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to arrest him. "I need to see your basement," Morrison said. "Is that all right?" It wasn't a request. "Do you have a warrant?" Arthur asked. "We can get one," Reichert said. "Or you can cooperate. Make this easier on everyone." Arthur considered his options. Refusing would make him look guilty. Cooperating would lead them straight to Evan's body. Either way, he was going exactly where Brenna wanted him. "There's something you should know," Arthur said. "What's that?" Morrison asked. "There's a body in my basement. I found it 2 days ago. I was about to call you." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Reichert's hand moved toward his belt. Morrison took a step back, her eyes hardening. "Show us," she said. They descended the stairs single file, Morrison in front, Arthur in the middle, Reichert behind him. The storage room door hung open the way Arthur had left it. The smell had gotten worse. Morrison pulled on latex gloves, stepped into the room, and pulled back the tarp. Evan Klein stared up at nothing, his throat gaping open, his skin waxy and pale. "Step outside, Mr. Graves," Morrison said without looking at him. Her voice had gone flat, professional, the warmth completely gone. "Now!" Reichert grabbed Arthur's arm, firm but not violent, and guided him back up the stairs. By the time they reached the kitchen, Arthur was in handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," Reichert said, his words clipped and fast. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Arthur barely heard the rest. He was watching Morrison through the window as she made phone calls, coordinating a crime scene team, sealing off the basement. He was thinking about Brenna, about the way she'd stood in the doorway a week ago with that cold calculation in her eyes. She'd planned this, every part of it. She'd reported Evan missing before his body was even cold. She'd given her statement first, framing the narrative, painting Arthur as violent and unpredictable. She'd waited just long enough for the body to be discovered naturally or for Arthur to report it himself. Either way, he'd look guilty. "Let's go," Reichert said, pulling Arthur toward the door. As they led him down the stairs, toward the police car waiting on the street, Arthur noticed something. Small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Brenna's wedding ring sat on the kitchen counter, placed carefully beside his phone. The diamond caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the laminate. She'd been here. Recently. While he was out. While he was at work. While he was distracted by grief and paperwork and the slow dissolution of his marriage. She'd placed the ring like a signature. Like proof. I was here. I left you. I'm done. The police car door closed with a heavy metallic thunk. Arthur sat in the back seat, his wrists aching from the cuffs, and watched the apartment recede through the window. Brenna wanted him locked away. She wanted the apartment sold. She wanted the money clean and untraceable. He decided, right then, in the back of that police car with Morrison and Riker in the front seat talking about evidence and probable cause, that she wouldn't get any of it. Not the apartment. Not the money. Not her freedom. He'd spent his whole life being underestimated, being seen as the quiet one, the steady one, the one who didn't make waves. Brenna had forgotten who he was. He wouldn't make that mistake about her. The holding cell smelled like industrial cleaner and sweat. Arthur sat on the metal bench, his back against the concrete wall, and waited. They'd taken his phone, his wallet, his belt, everything that could be used as a weapon or means of escape. He didn't mind. He'd learned patience early, learned to sit still and think while the world churned around him. 48 hours. That's all they had to charge him or let him go. Morrison and Reichert had questioned him for 3 hours straight. Where were you on the night of October 15th? Did you argue with Evan Klein? Did you have a financial interest in his death? What's your relationship with your wife like? Arthur had answered every question the same way. Calmly. Precisely. With just enough detail to be believable, but not enough to trap himself. I didn't kill Evan Klein, he'd said. I don't know who did. They'd pressed him about the body being in his storage room, about his access to the basement, about the fact that he'd waited 2 days to call the police. Arthur had stuck to his story. He'd found the body. He'd been in shock. He'd been about to report it when they arrived. Morrison hadn't believed him. Reichert definitely hadn't believed him. But belief wasn't the same as evidence. They had no murder weapon, no blood on Arthur's clothes or hands, no forensic evidence linking him to the crime, no witnesses who'd seen him near the apartment on the night Evan died. What they had was Brenna's statement, her tears, her claim that Arthur had a violent temper, that he'd argued with Evan, that she was terrified of what he might do. But statements weren't enough, not without physical evidence. On the second morning, Morrison appeared outside his cell with a manila folder under her arm. You're free to go, she said. No apology, no explanation, just a flat statement of fact. Arthur stood up slowly. Why? Your wife's timeline doesn't match the medical examiner's findings, Morrison said. Evan Klein died approximately 10 days ago. Your wife claims she witnessed an argument between you and her brother 3 weeks ago. She also claims she hasn't been to the apartment since she left you a week ago. Arthur said nothing. Morrison opened the folder and showed him a photograph. Security footage from the building across the street, grainy but clear enough. A figure entering the apartment building late at night, leaving 2 hours later. The timestamp read 10 days ago. The figure looked like Brenna. We're continuing the investigation, Morrison said. Don't leave town, Mr. Graves. We'll be in touch. They processed him out slowly, returning his belongings one item at a time. By the time Arthur stepped outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air felt colder than it had 2 days ago. Sharper. He walked back to the apartment, 1.5 miles through streets that smelled like wood smoke and dead leaves. When he reached the building, police tape still crisscrossed the front door. The bait shop downstairs was closed, a handwritten sign in the window saying back in a few days. Arthur let himself in through the side entrance and climbed the stairs to the apartment. The inside looked exactly as he'd left it, except for one detail. The joint bank account he shared with Brenna had been emptied. Arthur checked his phone, scrolling through the alerts. $14,000. Gone. Transferred to an account he didn't recognize. He sat down at the kitchen table and smiled. Brenna thought she was smart. She thought she could frame him for murder, take the money, and disappear before anyone connected the dots. But she'd made mistakes. Visible mistakes. The kind that left tracks. Arthur spent that night going through his mother's boxes again, this time with a different purpose. He wasn't looking for tax records, or old photographs. He was looking for anything that would tell him what Brenna had been doing here, why she'd come back, what she needed badly enough to kill her own brother. He found it at 3 in the morning. His mother had kept everything. Every utility bill, every insurance statement, every piece of paper that came through the door. Arthur remembered teasing her about it when he was younger, asking why she needed receipts from 5 years ago. She just smiled and said, "You never know when you'll need to prove something, Arthur." Paper doesn't lie. He worked through box after box, his eyes burning from the dim light, his back aching from hunching over. Most of it was mundane: electric bills, water bills, property tax statements. But then he found a folder labeled Loans 2023 to 2024. Inside were documents he'd never seen before. Loan applications, credit checks, signature pages, his signature, his social security number, his credit history. Except Arthur had never applied for these loans. Someone had forged his signature. Someone who'd had access to his personal information, his mother's apartment, his mail. Someone who knew exactly how much equity was in the property and how to leverage it. The loans totaled $80,000. All approved, all disbursed to an account Arthur didn't own. His hands tightened on the papers. The ink blurred slightly under his grip. Brenna. She'd been stealing from him for months, maybe longer, using his credit, his mother's property, his identity to funnel money into accounts he couldn't trace. And when Evan found out, when Evan threatened to expose her, she'd killed him. Arthur set the papers down carefully and took a breath. His mind was already working through the next steps, the evidence he'd need, the way to prove this without getting himself killed in the process. Then he noticed something else. At the bottom of the box, wedged beneath a stack of old insurance forms, was a backpack. Not his, not his mother's. He pulled it out. Black canvas, worn at the corners, a faded logo on the front. He unzipped it slowly. Inside was a burner phone. Cheap, prepaid. The kind you could buy at any convenience store and throw away after a few weeks. Arthur turned it on. The battery was low but functional. The phone had been used recently. Calls and texts dated from 2 weeks ago. He scrolled through the messages. Most were between two numbers he didn't recognize. Terse, coded language that didn't make sense without context. But the last message was different. "I want my cut by Friday, or I talk." Sent from this phone. To a number Arthur did recognize. Brenna's personal cell. Attached to the message was a photograph. A scanned document. One of the forged loan applications. Arthur's signature clearly visible, along with a note in the margin that read, "AG never saw this. Confirmed deposit." Arthur felt something shift inside him. Not anger, not shock, just cold, crystalline clarity. Evan had been blackmailing Brenna. He'd found out about the fraud, demanded his share, and when she refused or couldn't pay, he'd threatened to expose everything. So she killed him, framed Arthur, tried to make it look like a jealous rage over the apartment. But Evan had been smart enough to keep insurance. Evidence. Proof. And Brenna had been sloppy enough to leave it behind. Arthur scrolled further through the phone. There was one more file. A voice recording dated the night Evan died. He pressed play. Static. Shuffling sounds. Then voices. Evan, laughing nervously. "You can't be serious." Brenna's voice, calm and cold. "You should have taken the money and left, Evan. I told you that. You won't do this." Evan's voice was shaking now, fear creeping in. "You won't actually." "Already did," Brenna said. A sound. Wet. Sharp. Then silence. Then footsteps fading. The recording ended. Arthur sat in the dark apartment, the burner phone in his hand, and let the weight of what he'd found settle over him. This wasn't just evidence. This was everything. Motive. Opportunity. Confession. Brenna had recorded herself without realizing it. Or maybe Evan had started the recording, hoping to protect himself, not realizing it would be his last act. Either way, Arthur had it now. The timestamp on the recording placed Brenna in the apartment basement the night Evan died. The same night, she'd told police she was 3 states away visiting a friend. She'd lied, planned it, executed it, and she'd underestimated Arthur so completely that she'd never considered he might find this. He looked at the phone, at the recording, at the forged loan documents spread across the table. Then he looked at his own phone, at the empty bank account, at the message Brenna had sent him a week ago. Don't call me until you're ready to be reasonable. He wasn't going to call her. He was going to destroy her. Arthur didn't rush to the police. He learned young that acting too quickly was the same as acting without thinking, and that was how you lost control. His mother used to say, "Let people show you who they are before you show them what you know." It was advice that had saved him more times than he could count. Brenna thought she'd won. She'd framed him for murder, emptied their bank account, and disappeared into whatever new life she'd been planning. She probably thought he'd either be arrested again or give up, sell the apartment to pay for a lawyer, and let her walk away clean. She'd forgotten one critical detail. Arthur never gave up. He spent 2 days preparing. He made copies of the forged loan documents, uploaded them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, and printed physical copies that he stored in 2 different locations. He downloaded the voice recording from Evan's phone, transcribed it word for word, and created backups on encrypted drives. Then he waited. On the 3rd night after his release, Arthur sent a single text message to the burner phone Brenna had used to communicate with Evan. He left something behind. He attached a screenshot of the voice recording's timestamp. Then he went downstairs, sat on the steps outside the apartment building, and watched the lake. The water was dark, reflecting nothing but the faint lights from houses across the shore. The air smelled like pine and cold earth. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out, lonely and sharp. Arthur's phone buzzed. A call, not from Brenna's regular number, from a number he didn't recognize. He answered without speaking. Arthur, Brenna's voice. Tight, controlled, but underneath something else. Panic, maybe, or recognition that she'd miscalculated. Where are you? She asked. At the apartment, he said. Silence. Then stay there. I'm coming over. We need to talk. No, Arthur said. We don't. Arthur, listen to me. He hung up. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the building. A car pulled up fast, tires crunching on gravel. The door opened and Brenna stepped out, moving quickly, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked different than the last time he'd seen her. Thinner. Her hair was down, messy, and her makeup was smudged at the edges. She wore jeans and a hoodie instead of her usual polished clothes. This was Brenna off script, Brenna improvising. Arthur stood up from the steps as she approached. Where is it? She asked. No greeting. No pretense. Where's what? Arthur said. Don't play games with me. Her voice was sharp, but her hands were shaking. The phone. The recording. Whatever you think you found. Why would I have Evan's phone? Arthur asked. Brenna stopped a few feet away from him. Her eyes darted to the apartment building, to the windows, to the street behind her, like she was checking for witnesses. You don't understand, she said. This is bigger than you think. We can fix this. No, Arthur said quietly. You can't. Brenna took a step closer. Her voice dropped, became softer, almost pleading. Arthur, listen. Evan was out of control. He was stealing, lying, threatening people. I didn't have a choice. You killed your brother, Arthur said. I protected us, Brenna snapped, the mask slipping for just a second. He was going to ruin everything. The loans, the money, he knew about all of it. He was going to go to the police if I didn't pay him. So you framed me instead. Brenna's jaw tightened. You were supposed to sell the apartment. That was the deal. We'd split the money, move on, and nobody would have looked twice. But you had to be sentimental. You had to hold on to this. She gestured at the building, this dump. Arthur felt something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not even disgust, just clarity. He'd spent 3 years married to someone he'd never really known. Where's the phone? Brenna asked again. Somewhere safe, Arthur said. Give it to me. No. Brenna lunged forward then, fast and desperate, her hands reaching for his pockets. Arthur grabbed her wrists, holding them firm but not painful. She struggled, breathing hard, her eyes wild. Let me go, she hissed. You're going to confess, Arthur said. You're going to go to the police and tell them what you did. Brenna laughed. It was a broken sound, half hysterical. Are you insane? Why would I do that? Because if you don't, Arthur said, I'll send copies of everything to the police, to your family, to every news outlet in the state. The recording, the loan fraud, all of it. They won't believe you, Brenna said. I'm the victim here. I reported my brother missing. I try to protect you. You're the one with his body in your basement. The timeline doesn't work, Arthur said. The medical examiner already knows that. And the security footage shows you entering the building the night Evan died. When you said you were 3 states away, Brenna went very still. Her breathing slowed. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Colder, more calculated. You think you're smart, she said. You think you figured this all out. But you don't know everything, Arthur. You never did. Tell me then, Arthur said. Brenna pulled her wrists free from his grip and stepped back. She straightened her hoodie, pushing hair out of her face. When she looked at him again, her expression was almost pitying. You were always too sentimental, she said. That's why this was easy. You cared about this apartment, your mother, your stupid sense of loyalty. I knew exactly how to use that. I knew you'd hold on to this place. I knew you'd be predictable. And you were sloppy, Arthur said. Was I? Brenna smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Or did I let you find exactly what I wanted you to find? Arthur felt the first flicker of doubt. The phone was in the open, Brenna continued. The recording was easy to access. Don't you think that's convenient? Don't you think maybe I left it there on purpose? Why would you do that? Arthur asked. Because I need leverage, Brenna said. I need you to think you have something on me. I need you to come after me. Because when you do, when you try to use that recording, those documents, all your little pieces of evidence, I'll be ready. And I'll have proof that you planted it all. That you faked the evidence to frame me for a murder you committed. Arthur stared at her. For the first time since finding Evan's body, he felt uncertain. Brenna saw it. Her smile widened. You think you're playing chess, she said. But you're not even on the board. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the audio file he'd prepared and pressed play. Brenna's voice filled the space between them, tinny but clear from the recording. I already did. The wet sound of the knife. The footsteps. Brenna's face went pale. Actually pale. The color drained from her cheeks, and her breath caught. That's impossible, she whispered. You confessed, Arthur said. On tape. In your own voice. And I sent copies to 5 different people an hour ago. Lawyers. Journalists. Morrison and Reichert at the police department. Brenna's hands clenched into fists. You're lying. Arthur turned his phone around, showing her the sent messages. The timestamps. The confirmation receipts. You can run, he said, but it'll follow you. Everywhere. Brenna screamed then. Not words. Just sound. Raw and furious and terrified all at once. She grabbed his phone and threw it against the building. It shattered against the brick, pieces scattering across the ground. You don't understand what you've done, she said, her voice shaking. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Understand perfectly, Arthur said. Brenna backed away from him, stumbling slightly. Her hands went to her hair, pulling at it, her breathing ragged. Then she stopped. She looked at him one more time, and something shifted in her eyes. The panic faded. The calculation returned. This isn't over, she said. Then she turned and ran to her car. Arthur didn't try to stop her. He stood in the cold air and watched her drive away, taillights disappearing down the street toward the highway. He knew she wouldn't make it far. The police arrested Brenna before sunrise. Morrison called Arthur at 6 in the morning to tell him. They'd found her at a motel 40 miles north, packing a suitcase, preparing to cross state lines. She tried to run when she saw the police cars. They'd stopped her at the parking lot exit. She's asking for a lawyer, Morrison said. Her voice was neutral, professional, but Arthur could hear the edge of satisfaction underneath. We're bringing her in for questioning. The district attorney will want to talk to you about testifying. I'll do whatever's necessary, Arthur said. He hung up and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where his mother had paid bills and written grocery lists and taught him how to budget his first paycheck. Dawnlight filtered through the windows, pale and cold. Arthur felt empty. Not relieved, not victorious, just tired. Over the next 3 weeks, the story came out in pieces. The forged loans, the blackmail, the recording. Morrison and Reichert pieced together a timeline that matched everything Arthur had found, everything Brenna had tried to hide. Evan had discovered his sister's fraud scheme 6 months ago. Instead of going to the police, he'd tried to leverage it for money. Brenna had paid him off twice, small amounts, but Evan kept coming back. When he demanded $80,000 and threatened to expose everything if she didn't pay by the end of the month, Brenna had made her decision. She'd lured him to the apartment, killed him, and planted his body in Arthur's storage room. Then she'd created a false timeline, reported him missing, and waited for the police to do the rest. It almost worked. Arthur testified once. He sat in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor polish, and he answered every question calmly, precisely, without embellishment. He explained finding the body, the phone, the recording, the forged documents. Brenna sat at the defense table, her hair pulled back, wearing a gray suit that made her look professional and sympathetic. She stared at him the entire time, her expression unreadable. When Arthur finished his testimony, he stood up and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty, murder in the first degree, fraud, identity theft. Sentencing came 3 months later. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Arthur didn't attend. He'd said everything he needed to say. The apartment stayed with Arthur. He renovated it slowly, room by room, taking his time. He kept the old door frames his mother had painted 20 years ago. He refinished the hardwood floors, but left the scars where furniture had sat for decades. He replaced the kitchen counters, but kept the same layout, the same angles, because it felt right. The storage room he emptied completely. He cleaned it with bleach and industrial cleaner, scrubbing until the smell of death was gone. Then he painted it white and turned it into a workshop. It took 6 months. When he was finished, the apartment looked both new and familiar. It smelled like fresh paint and would stain instead of pine cleaner and fish scales. Light came through the windows differently now, brighter somehow. Arthur sat on the steps outside the building one evening in late spring, watching the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the sunset in shades of pink and gold. Birds called to each other across the shore. Somewhere in the distance, someone was grilling, the smell of charcoal and cooking meat drifting on the breeze. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Morrison. Wanted you to know Brenna's appeals were denied. The conviction stands. Hope you're doing all right." Arthur read the message twice, then deleted it. He didn't need updates about Brenna. She was gone from his life as completely as if she'd never existed. The apartment was his. The debt was paid. His credit was restored. He'd won. Not because he was smarter than her. Not because he was stronger. Because she'd underestimated him. She'd thought he was weak, sentimental, easy to manipulate. She'd been wrong about all of it. Arthur stood up from the steps and went back inside. He closed the door behind him, firmly, completely, the way his mother had taught him, and locked it. The apartment settled around him. The refrigerator hummed. The pipes knocked softly in the walls. Outside, the lake lapped against the shore. He made himself dinner. Simple. Pasta with butter and garlic, the way his mother used to make it. He ate at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the darkening sky. When he was finished, he washed his plate, dried it, and put it away in the cabinet. Then he sat down in the living room, picked up a book he'd been reading, and turned to the bookmark page. The apartment was quiet. It was home, and nobody could take that from him.